An ordinary face would become, in a single instant, brighter than the sun itself, in front of three men who would never forget what they saw on that mountain. The Church celebrates today, August 6th, the Transfiguration of the Lord, one of the oldest and highest feasts on the entire Christian calendar, not the memory of a canonized person, but the revelation of Jesus Christ's own divine identity. The Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell us that Jesus went up a high mountain, taking Peter, James, and John with him. While he prayed, his face shone and his clothes turned white as light. Beside him appeared Moses and Elijah, representing the law and the prophets of the entire Old Testament, speaking with him. Peter, overcome with awe, wanted to build 3 tents right there, but a bright cloud overshadowed them, and the Father's voice declared, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." Jesus then touched the disciples and said, "Rise, and do not be afraid." This episode happens right after the first prediction of the Passion, as if the Father wanted to strengthen the disciples before the trial still waiting for them in Jerusalem. Tradition identifies Mount Tabor as the place of this revelation, and today's date also carries a 40-day spiritual link to the exaltation of the Holy Cross in September. The Transfiguration teaches something that applies to every one of us. Even when the cross is still ahead, God already shows us, in advance, the glory that waits on the other side. On this very same day, centuries after that mountain in Galilee, a pope would be seized in the middle of worship and killed on the spot, surrounded by 4 of his own deacons. This is Saint Sixtus II, Pope and Martyr, also celebrated on August 6, the date of his martyrdom in the year 258. Elected Bishop of Rome in 257, Sixtus found the Church divided by a bitter dispute over baptism administered outside Roman communion. His predecessor had broken relations with African and Eastern bishops over it. Sixtus chose the path of reconciliation, restored communion with those bishops, and led his brief pontificate in a spirit of peace, without abandoning Rome's own practice. That peace lasted only months. Emperor Valerian launched a persecution ordering the immediate execution of bishops, priests, and deacons. On August 6, 258, Sixtus was seized during a liturgical celebration in a Christian cemetery on the Appian Way and killed on the spot, together with 4 members of his own clergy. Saint Cyprian of Carthage, writing only weeks later, recorded that Sixtus suffered martyrdom in the cemetery, and with him 4 deacons, a near contemporary witness, not a later legend. He was buried in the crypt of the popes, where Pope Damasus later celebrated the memory of the persecuted. Sixtus left no great writings, but he left something rarer, proof that it's possible to govern with gentleness in times of division, and still surrender everything without hesitation when the hour comes. In a very different way, 2 young brothers, still children, would face that same persecution in Roman Hispania, and their courage would cross 17 centuries all the way to today. Saints Justus and Pastor, the Holy Children of Alcalá, are also celebrated on August 6, with martyrdom traditionally placed around the year 304, in Complutum, today's Alcalá de Henares, Spain. Tradition tells us the 2 brothers were studying at a school in the city when they learned that Diocletian's persecution had reached the town. They left their writing tablets on the table, went outside, and spontaneously declared their faith before the Roman governor Datian. They were scourged and then put to death outside the city, encouraging one another until the very end. Already in the 4th century, the Christian poet Prudentius was writing about the blood of these 2 brothers joined together, confirming that Complutum guarded both their bodies with great veneration, an ancient testimony that supports the real weight of this story. Their burial site became a place of pilgrimage and gave rise to the church now raised to the magistral cathedral of Alcalá. Justus and Pastor are official patrons of the city and diocese of Alcalá de Henares, remembered to this day as patrons of children and students. The short life of these 2 brothers teaches something many adults take years to learn: faith doesn't wait for us to grow up in order to be real. Also on this same day, but more than 200 years later, a man who had once been married, a father, and a widower would become pope and spend his entire pontificate trying to heal a schism that had already lasted a generation. This is Saint Hormisdas, Pope, also celebrated on August 6, the date of his death in the year 523. Born in Frosinone, Italy, Hormisdas was married before ordination and had a son who would later become Pope Saint Silverius. Widowed, he became a deacon and, in 514, was elected Bishop of Rome, inheriting a problem decades in the making, the Acacian Schism, a rupture between Rome and Constantinople caused by disagreements over the nature of Christ. Early negotiations failed, but after a change of emperor in Constantinople, Hormisdas sent legates carrying a profession of faith that became known as the Formula of Hormisdas, beginning with the words, "The first condition of salvation is to keep the rule of the true faith." In 519, after 35 years of separation, the Patriarch of Constantinople and his bishops accepted that formula, and communion between East and West was solemnly restored. Hormisdas died in Rome in 523 and was buried in St. Peter's Basilica. His life shows that the experience of a family, a marriage, and a loss can, in God's hands, prepare someone to heal even the deepest divisions within the Church itself. Meanwhile, many centuries later, in 19th-century Italy, a young lady's companion would cross the Atlantic Ocean 7 times rather than abandon the sisters she had formed on the other side of the world. This is Saint Maria Francesca of Jesus Rubato, religious sister and founder, also celebrated on August 6, the date of her death in the year 1904. Born Anna Maria Rubato in Carmagnola, in Italy's Piedmont region, she lost her father at age 4 and her mother at 19, and began working as a lady's companion in Turin, devoting her free time to catechism and caring for the city's poorest sick. In 1883, in the town of Loano, she helped a young worker injured during the construction of a building meant to house a women's religious community. After prayer and spiritual counsel, including from St. John Bosco, she agreed to devote herself entirely to that work, and in 1885 the institute now known as the Capuchin Sisters of Madre Rubato was born. The congregation grew rapidly and, in 1892, reached Uruguay. Madre Rubato crossed the Atlantic 7 times to personally accompany her missionaries in South America. In 1901, 7 of her sisters were killed in Maranhão, Brazil, a tragedy that marked her deeply without ever making her give up the mission. She died of cancer in Montevideo in 1904, and was canonized by Pope Francis in 2022. Her life teaches that truly serving others sometimes means crossing the sea as many times as it takes. Going back to that same day in the year 258, it's worth remembering that Saint Sixtus II did not die alone. 6 deacons of his own clergy were killed together with him, or on that same day, and the Church remembers them too. Today, August 6, Saints Felicissimus, Agapetus, Januarius, Magnus, Vincent, and Stephen are remembered as the companion martyrs of Sixtus II, killed during Emperor Valerian's persecution. Saint Cyprian of Carthage, writing shortly after the events, confirms that 4 deacons died with the Pope in that cemetery on the Appian Way. Roman tradition identifies those 4 as Januarius, Magnus, Vincent, and Stephen. Felicissimus and Agapetus, also deacons, were killed the same day and buried in another nearby cemetery, that of Praetextatus. Emperor Valerian's decree ordered the immediate execution of all senior Christian clergy, a deliberate attempt to break the Church's leadership all at once. There are no detailed biographies of these 6 men, nor personal words that have come down to us. What remains is the historical fact, supported by near-contemporary testimony, that they served beside their pope to the very end. Their tombs became, very early on, places of memory and veneration in Rome. The lives of these 6 deacons teach that holiness doesn't always need a long biography. Sometimes it's enough to stand beside the one you love until the very last moment. In a very different way, already in the 20th century, a Spanish sacristan would surrender himself to his own persecutors to protect his mother, knowing exactly what that meant. This is Blessed Carlos López Vidal, married layman and martyr, also celebrated on August 6, the date of his death in the year 1936. Born in Gandia, Spain, in 1894, Carlos once considered the priesthood, but health problems led him to fully embrace the lay vocation instead. He became second sacristan of his city's collegiate church and married Maria Rosa Tarazona Ribaroca in 1923. The couple had no children, but Carlos devoted himself to Catholic apostolate and even sheltered nuns expelled from their convents when religious persecution intensified in Spain. When the Spanish Civil War began in July 1936, churches were attacked and Catholics publicly identified with the church became direct targets of armed militias. Carlos took refuge at his own mother's house, but on August 6, during a search, he turned himself into the militiamen to avoid exposing his family to reprisal. He was taken to a field near Gandia and shot that same day. Testimonies gathered for his beatification cause say his last words were, "Long live Christ the King." Pope St. John Paul II beatified him in 2001, recognizing his death as martyrdom out of hatred for the faith. Carlos's life teaches that protecting the people we love sometimes demands the highest sacrifice there is. In that same dark period of history, but now in Nazi-occupied Poland, a young seminarian would share his own piece of bread with weaker companions inside one of the most feared concentration camps of the Second World War. This is Blessed Tadeusz Dolny, Polish seminarian and martyr, also celebrated on August 6, the date of his death in 1942. Born in 1914 into a rural family of 8 children, Tadeusz entered the seminary of Włocławek in 1935, remembered less for intellectual brilliance than for his discipline, cheerfulness, and constant readiness to help his classmates. After Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939, the clergy and seminaries became direct targets of a policy that sought to destroy the country's religious and cultural leadership. Tadeusz was arrested that same November, together with professors and fellow seminarians, and passed through several prisons before arriving at the Dachau concentration camp in December 1940, where he received only a number in place of his own name. Hunger, forced labor, and disease consumed the young seminarian year after year, but testimonies from fellow prisoners say he shared his food and took on the tasks of weaker companions, even while exhausted himself. He died in 1942, and was beatified by Pope St. John Paul II in 1999, among 108 Polish martyrs of that occupation. Tadeusz's life teaches that the truest charity sometimes happens exactly where the least is left to give. Going back even further in time, to 12th-century Italy, a Benedictine monk, brother of a future pope, would devote decades of his episcopate to reforming the church and caring for the poorest of his city. This is Blessed Ottaviano of Savona, monk and bishop, also celebrated on August 6, with his death traditionally placed between 1132 and 1133. Born around 1060 in Quingy, Burgundy, Ottaviano was the brother of Guido of Burgundy, who would become pope under the name Calixtus II. He entered the Benedictine monastery of San Pietro in Ciel d'Oro, in Pavia, while still young, and years later took charge of the diocese of Savona, in Italy's Ligurian region, during the first half of the 12th century, a period marked by the Gregorian reform movement, which sought to purify the discipline and spiritual life of clergy throughout Christendom. As bishop, Ottaviano encouraged religious life and the education of the young, and became especially known for his closeness to the poor of the city, while also supporting the growth of Savona's free municipal government. After his death, his body was venerated in an old local cathedral, and his relics were transferred over the centuries until reaching the current Cathedral of Savona, where they remain in their own chapel to this day. Pope Pius VI confirmed his cult officially in 1783. Ottaviano's life teaches that the most lasting reform of a community almost always begins with simple closeness to those who have the least. And we close today's journey, August 6, also going back to the 12th century, but now to a dense forest near the city of Luxembourg, where a man would live entirely alone in the open for nearly 14 years, feeding only on what the earth offered. This is Blessed Gessalino of Luxembourg, hermit, also celebrated on August 6, with his death traditionally placed between 1138 and 1139. Gessalino lived in the Grunewald, the forest northeast of the city of Luxembourg, with no permanent shelter, enduring snow and heat with little clothing, feeding on herbs, roots, and water, a radical asceticism that impressed even the Cistercian monks of the region. According to tradition, the monk Achard, linked to the founding of Himmerod, was sent to meet him and even offered him the habit of the Cistercian order. Gessalino received the proposal with respect, but remained faithful to his own solitary calling in the forest. Before dying, he sought the sacraments at a nearby church, and was buried first beside his own cave. Decades later, his body was moved to a Benedictine abbey in Luxembourg. The cave and spring that still bear his name today, in the middle of that forest, still keep his memory alive in the region. Gessalino's life teaches that the most radical poverty, lived in total trust, can become, by itself, a constant prayer. And with that story, we close today's 10 saints, and blesseds. If any of these lives touched your heart, subscribe here to Saint of the Day. Comment asking for one of their intercession for someone you love. And most of all, share this video, because every time you share a story like this one, you're not just passing along a video, you're evangelizing. You're carrying the faith to someone who might need to hear exactly this message today. Your share could be the reason someone starts praying again, walks back into a church, or finds hope in a hard moment. And remember, the complete prayer to each of them is right here in the video description.